Welcome to the Numisphere, a podcast diving into all things in the sphere of numismatics, talking the latest news and trends of precious metals, coins, currency, and more. Let's start the show.
Okay, so what I was going to say is, you buy a nice rare Morgan, certain grade, something you're looking for. That's a great way to hold value, and of course, you're assuming that 10, 20, 30 years down the road, that's going to have increased in value. And if you look back, they almost always do, right? You
Generally.
can go back at any old numismatic coin far enough, and you see the auction records, and you see a steady increase, other than some down market blips. But over the long term, it's usually a very safe investment.
Coins themselves also have cycles, right?
Correct.
So as that inventory is accessible, you do have a supply and demand aspect to it.
Right.
But generally, over time, they perform.
But if you can get good at picking the right modern numismatic piece, the returns are crazy. And again, it's more of a Wild West than modern than old numismatics is. But you're basically constrained by these limited mintages. That's what drives the whole thing.
Right.
What I was going to say about a Morgan is they were made in the millions. Now, obviously, things have been melted over time, and there's different conditional factors and all these other things. But a new modern collectible, and this is something I know that your brother TJ had mentioned something about a floating coin. He had asked me about it before we got on the air. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that's a perfect example of this. There's a coin that was made by the Mint of Poland very recently, and it's a UFO. But the UFO actually floats. It actually hovers with nothing under it because they built magnets into it. And the box, they built the opposite magnets into it, and if you put it over the box, it
So the
floats.
coin is essentially levitating.
The coin levitates.
Yep.
It's 7 ounces of silver. It's big. And they had it on display at the Berlin show in February, and everybody went crazy over it. But the mintage of that piece, I want to say, was 500. It's very, very limited. Now, it's expensive because it's 7 ounces, But
And that's a very unique manufacturing.
very
Plus
unique.
The base, the housing, and everything
and it's
else.
a three-dimensional object too.
Right.
It's flat on the bottom where they can stamp the effigy and so on, but it's still a pretty three-dimensional object. So what's interesting is, of course, they got flooded with orders after the Berlin trade show, and to the point where 10 times the mintage was requested. And I remember our wholesale pricing was somewhere around $725. I want to say was the cost we were charging dealers. Now, what the dealers were selling it for, I don't. Like originally, before it got extremely hot, I don't know what. I'm assuming a normal margin markup, somewhere between $900 and $1,000 was probably the retail. If you try to find one of those now, and they haven't even, by the way, they haven't even come out yet.
Right.
Like they haven't even been shipped to the U.S. yet. This was just a pre-sale. The prices are already 50% over what that retail cost was, and by the time they're live, that's when you see the real spike.
Right.
When the product hits the stores and it's already all accounted for. It's not like most of your dealers aren't going to have any for sale because they've already pre-sold the product. So now the demand is this high, but the supply is super low. And you're going to see people probably paying $2,000 and $2,500 to get one of these if they can find one.
Right.
Because out of the 500, how many made it out of Europe? How many were shipped to Asia, Australia? Different coin collecting's big everywhere. So out of the 500, how many came to the U.S.? Half if we're lucky.
And then how many are actually available for sale?
And how many will be available for sale once they're finally shipped here? My guess is if the U.S. got 250 of 500, which is, again, being generous, 10% of those might still be available, like uncommitted sales by the time it hits your shelves. There's just none. So those people can ask the moon for it because and it's there. It's a legitimate supply and demand discrepancy. And if you could get good at kind of figuring that out as a retail consumer, if you have a dealer that's offering you steadily a stream of products and you can figure out to some extent, and again, they're not all going to be things that are worth 10 times in a week.
Of course.
But there are some that are worth 50% more in a month or two or 100% more in 3 months. And you can avoid some of the opposites things, which is always the goal, right? You can actually have a really good time playing in that arena and buying stuff you actually like. It's not just like, if you're into sci-fi, what's cooler than a floating UFO coin, right?
Absolutely.
And if you can turn that around and double your money in a short period of time on top of that,
It's a win-win.
so much the better.
Yep.
Or if you were able to get it in the initial offering at the normal retail and you put it away as a collector yourself, how good does it feel to know that that piece has already appreciated that much in value,
Right.
and you're not waiting 20 years to see that, in your bottom line,
Right.
So it is interesting. But I will say this too. Obviously, we have to talk about the downsides, the potential pitfalls, the dud coin that doesn't go up but goes down.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing that is helpful is you're never going to see the same level of down as you would see up. So if there's a coin, and I'll give you another good example. Germanium Mint. People are familiar with Germanium Mint. Okay, they came out with a new product line maybe 2 months ago of these colorized cast bars. They're not coins. They're just silver bars. Beautiful artwork, well packaged, but a very basic thing at the end of the day.
Right.
And the first one they did is a series called Goddesses, and the first one was Freya, and the mintage was 1,000, and they sold them at a very reasonable price. I think, like I said, I don't remember what they charged us, but our wholesale was in the high 80s. The retail was probably 110, something like that, when it first came out. But boy, did people go crazy for this thing.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
the reasons...
That went right into allocation, didn't it?
Oh, it went to allocation,
Yeah.
absolutely. So we got orders. We alone got orders for almost 500. The whole mintage is only 1,000 worldwide.
wow.
So, needless to say, we weren't going to get 500. I mean, it's not going to happen. But what was interesting about that is when they finally were live, you could jump on any secondary market, whether it's, obviously eBay's the big one, but look at, just secondary markets like Whatnot or, wherever, where people are selling new products. Mm-hmm. Very consistently selling at $400. That's not, you can look that up. You can go on eBay today. I encourage anybody to do it. Look.
Hey, did you hear that?
Yep.
Freya, $400.
Oh, yeah.
Let's throw it on Whatnot tomorrow.
Completed sales, right? Just boom, boom, boom,
I
boom,
believe
boom.
it.
And they're legitimate people jumping on this at that price. It's 4 times the value,
Yeah.
right? Now, the flip side of that, what if you buy something that's not desirable, that doesn't click with people?
Right.
And the supply and demand goes in the opposite direction, where it's a 3,000 mintage and not that many people want it, and you got one, okay? You're never going to see the same level of downturn. You're not going to see a $100 coin selling for $25,
Right.
okay? Which is the inverse of the 4 times, right? So it's not going to sell for a quarter of what you paid for it. Mm-hmm. So the highest highs are higher than the lowest lows, is all I'm saying. But you can still make mistakes. You can still buy stuff that unfortunately is going to decrease relatively quickly. However, the good news is you're still able to buy stuff you like. If you buy a product as an investment and you don't care about it, and it goes down in value, that's almost a double stinger in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because now you got something that's just a brick that you don't care about, and it's worth less than you paid for it. At least if you're buying something that has a appeal to you personally in some way, you're more willing to ride out the low. You can say, you know what, I love Star Wars. Maybe for whatever reason, this coin, I bought it, it's got Darth Vader on it, it didn't resonate, and I paid $100, but the market's $75 now. That's what people are paying for it.
Sure.
You still like having it. And you
Right.
can hold it longer.
That softens the blow.
It softens
and you
the
just,
blow.
You hold on to it because you like the piece.
Yes, and just like traditional numismatics, if you ride it out long enough, the market comes
market will
back.
shift. Yeah.
Because what has to happen is all the supply that was manufactured, where there's a supply and demand discrepancy, has to get soaked up.
Right.
And it takes time for that to happen on a piece that's not red hot, right? But once it happens, if you fast forward a year, 2 years down the road, and you go back and try to find one of those coins, well, now they're all in the hands of collectors and they've been put away. So there's not a huge supply. And you'll see that retail price will creep back up and usually exceed what the original retail was. And I run this test all the time. I have my employees, we always tell them, you want to check market trends. You want to see what's going on. I said, when we get an old coin in, something from 2020 or earlier, so talking 4 years or older, I want you to look up what it's selling for now, if you can find one. Sometimes they're very difficult to find because there may only be a handful out there. And you go on eBay and they go, oh, I got this 2019, Marvel, Venom coin, whatever it is. Who knows? I'm making stuff up, right? And there's only 2 guys on eBay that have them, and they're selling them for $125. Seems reasonable enough for a 1-ounce silver that's tough to find, right? But what was the original retail on that coin 5 years ago? It was certainly lower than $125.
Right.
So it's really a matter of, if you make a mistake on something that you like, it softens the blow, and now you're just treating it almost like the modern numismatic, where you're going to play the longer game of investment.
I mean, I was going to say, I know many dealers that actually take that strategy where they'll buy a large quantity up front, whether it's a dud or not.
Yeah.
because they know that if they hang on to that product for that 18 to 24 months, that it's going to come back on the other end. And again, after that's been kind of absorbed and the accessibility of that material isn't there, they can start getting that value back out.
1,000%. I see it a lot. And it's actually some of the best stuff we get is when one of those guys that held a couple cases of product back, it's 2 years later and he wants to now distribute that product and he comes to us to do that. Our customers love that stuff. Old stuff is new again. You know what I mean? It's like they haven't seen this coin in 2 years, if they ever saw it at all, because who knows what they were doing 2 years ago. And it a lot of times that stuff has more demand than a brand new thing that came out yesterday. We see it constantly, and I love that when that happens. I think it proves the validity of the wedge of the numosphere that I'm in, right? It's like, we don't have a 200-year track record with this type of product.
Right.
I mean, you could say that, U.S. Mint commemoratives technically kind of fit into that arena, right?
Sure.
And they were making U.S. Mint commemoratives in the 20s and 30s, right? And they were not designed for circulation. And so they were collectibles, and they were modern when they were issued.
Right.
And of course, those have stood the test of time. But that's the idea, but on just a massive scale, with new technologies being instituted all the time.
Sure.
Things to dress them up and make them something you haven't seen before.
Right.
Instead of just another stamped piece of silver, which listen, if it's the right design, is still awesome every
We've
day.
been having licensed products issued, 2000s, 90s. Disney's doing it back in the 80s. So that type of stuff's been around.
Yeah.
But the way in which they can do it today is just unseen.
So something I would say, and this is an example I use all the time. Last year, New Zealand Mint produced a Star Wars kilo for the anniversary of whatever movie was hitting its 40th anniversary. Like, I can keep track, right? Empire Strikes Back or New Hope or whatever one it was.
Yeah.
And it was, so it was a 2023 dated. So what came out in 83? Return of the Jedi? Sure. So maybe it was Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Yeah. So big kilo, colorized, gorgeous, obviously very expensive. And the mintage was $2.99 or $1.99. It was a very, very limited piece. Hard to get. And everybody was going crazy over it because we've never seen a colorized Star Wars kilo with the super low mintage. Like, what a cool thing. And it was a tremendous piece. But what they didn't realize is it had been done before. It was done in 2012 by the same mint. They made a colorized Star Wars kilo for a different movie. Maybe that one was the one for Empire Strikes Back or a different one, whatever.
Sure.
But that piece was 11 years old. And if you tried to find one, good luck. The only record I could find of one was a graded 69 that somebody had sold in, I think it was a heritage auction, like in 2015 or something. So it's interesting how fast stuff falls out of the public zeitgeist, if you will, right? Sure. Like, it doesn't take long, because so much new stuff comes on the market all the time, for us to kind of forget the things that we sold 2, 3, 4, 10 years ago. And that kilo, if it came up for sale, the 2012 one, if that came up for sale now in any place, I would take $5,000 out of my wallet, because I'm never going to see one. Like, right. And that comes back to that supply and demand. If you're a Star Wars collector and you've got this amazing collection that you started putting together 5 and 6 years ago, you probably never saw that piece.
Right.
And now one comes on the auction block, you're going to have a lot of people jumping on it. And it's going to sell for 3 times what that one that came out last year sells for, because it's so rare. But mintage-wise, it's not any rarer. It's just rarer to find in the market. And I think that's the other thing, that people don't understand the difference between rarity and scarcity. They think they're synonymous, and they're not.
They're not.
Rarity is how many are produced. Scarcity is how many are available.
Right.
And a lot of times, the hottest things are always scarce, even if the mintages are a hair higher, because no one ever lets them go. Mm-hmm. No one ever pulls them out of their safe and puts them up for sale. So because they're so desirable.
Right.
That's the stuff that, I'd rather have a scarce piece than a rare piece, I think, in
And we see that not just on more artistic and licensed pieces, but mints will do exclusive privies for specific regions.
Absolutely.
And that stuff really doesn't leave that market and come stateside or go to Europe or become available to others.
Awesome example. Perth is actually notorious for this. They make versions of their coins for coin shows, specific shows that are in Australia only. Mm-hmm. So there's we have obviously the fun show here, and the ANA is a big show here in the United States. Well, in Australia, it's called the ANDA. That's their ANA show.
Right.
And they do one, it's 4 times a year, it's quarterly, and they hold them in the big cities. So there's a Perth one, a Melbourne one, a Sydney one, and a Brisbane one.
This is usually the kookaburra that they do different varieties, right?
And so they take the regular kookaburra, and they'll either do a colorized version or a privy mark version that comes in a nice card from that show. It's the Perth ANDA show kookaburra. And the mintage of that is usually 1 to 2,000, and most of them never leave Australia.
Right.
So as a collector, if you're into the kookaburra line, that's like a really rare bird to get. No pun intended. It was intended, actually. But, and they do that. There's even an even more obscure show in Australia called the Perth Stamp and Coin Show. Actually, yeah, it's good. I mean, we don't even see hardly any stamp shows here anymore, right?
Very few, yeah.
But over there, I guess it's still a thing. And they do a colorized koala for the Perth Stamp and Coin Show. And boy, are those hard to find, I'll tell you. And they're not expensive. They're 1 ounce colorized coins in a nice card, but to get them here, that's where that scarcity is. Like, if they make 2,000, I would guess 1,600 never leave Australia. So
I think the only ones I really saw come to the U.S. market in any volume were the COVID year where the shows were canceled.
Bingo. And you know what helped that? So yes, the COVID year, they made them. They had them ready to go.
Right.
COVID canceled all the shows. So a lot of them, the point is to sell them at the show. It's a draw for the collector who goes to those shows. They can pick up a unique.
It's the only place to get them.
Exactly. But the shows were canceled. So now they're sitting on the stock of these.
Right.
And Perth made them available to their distributors. And what was really cool and what helped sell them even more is NGC got involved. And NGC was willing to grade them with a emergency COVID designation on the label, which changed the game from a collector's perspective. Because this is the thing about what I was saying, where we forget the things from just a few years ago sometimes, because there's so much new stuff all the time. Well, how do we capture that moment so that we don't forget it? Right. And now, when you go back, and if you were a customer who bought one at that time, and it's a 2020, right, and it's 2020 kookaburra, COVID emergency cancellation of the Perth show, and it's on the label, that's going to be on there forever. 20 years from now, they're going to know the reason that this coin exists in its form that it's in is because of a very special event that, I shouldn't say special, I mean, COVID was awful, obviously, but, a very unique set of circumstances that led to it in its form. It adds such an additional premium over the previous years. Like, if you could buy a 2015 ANDA kookaburra in a slab in a 70, and you're going to pay a decent amount for it, but those COVID emergency labels were just so hot.
I think I still have the set of 4.
Yeah, it's a set of 4.
Yeah, it's a set of 4. I have that tucked back somewhere.
Now this year, God bless them, they're still doing the Privy Mark Kooks, but they're also, because it's the Year of the Dragon, 2024.
Okay.
That is, Perth's known for Lunars, right? Everyone knows. They make the Lunar series. They're on Series 3. It's always a popular thing. But the Dragon is the most popular. And so they go all out in Year of the Dragon. And so they are also doing colorized ANDA show dragons.
Oh, cool.
And what's even crazier about that is normally what they do is they take the base design for that year, and they colorize it or put a privy on it just for that show.
Right.
For the dragons, they're actually doing a different design for each show. So they're actually minting totally different coins for each ANDA show and colorizing them.
Oh, nice.
All dragon motifs.
And they'll still distribute them in the card as well?
They still come in the card.
Nice.
And there's the Perth one was yellow. It was a yellow dragon. The next show was a blue dragon. There's going to be a purple and I believe a pink. And those haven't come out yet. The yellow one came out, but the other ones haven't come out yet. And they also did do a carded version of the standard bullion dragon colorized, but it was not for a particular show. It was just as a way to kind of have a completion piece because they were doing actual different die strikes for these different shows, which they've never done before. That's like unheard of because obviously there's a lot of cost that goes into doing different dies, different designs, artists, all these different things. So to only make 1,000 or 2,000 of a coin for them is kind of like, But for the Year of the Dragon, they wanted to do something special, and it's.
The dragon's been hot everywhere. I think at the beginning of the year, Canada did that red carded release with the dragon on it.
Yep.
We got a small batch in, and I think we were one of the first out online. instantly gone.
Well, these are the examples that we want people to know about, because if you see something that really appeals to you and you start to get into the hobby of modern collectible coins, you can pretty quickly figure out there's these things are the right things to buy.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be the only thing you buy. It can be an addition to the type of collecting you're already doing. If you're a traditional numismatic collector, if you're somebody who buys bullion as a hedge against inflation, or somebody who wants to just speculate on metals markets or whatever the case might be, this could be a great add-on to what you're already doing, because it's a very different market.
Right.
They're not tied together. Silver goes down, your collectible doesn't go down. If silver goes from 25 to 20, your UFO that floats hasn't changed in value.
Right.
If anything, it may have gone up depending on demand. So they're very separate markets. And we all know you want to diversify, in any investment line. And I think those are three ways to diversify. If you buy traditional, old numismatics with history, with track record, that's a different market than metals. Buying metals is obviously a different market. Right. And then you have the modern collectible coin, which is different in its own way. It's never.
I think it's kind of a melding of all of those, right? So generally, a numismatic collector is getting into a specific item because they appreciate it. They like the history, the story. I would say the majority aren't at investment level numismatics, right?
Yes.
So you take that aspect of, I really appreciate this piece, and you pair it with the fact that it's still a commodity and you have a tangible asset with it, that's that bridge of how that bullion collector and stacker becomes numismatic collector or collecting coins in some form.
Well, and I also think the other bridge is, in what makes the old world coins the most valuable? What's the single thing? It's condition.
Absolutely.
Conditional rarity trumps general rarity in a lot of ways. Like, you can have a common date Morgan in what we would call, unk, loose, not graded, just unks. And there's kind of a, set buy price out there. Everyone knows what those are worth.
Right.
But if you have that same common date Morgan in an MS-67 holder,
it's a different game.
Totally different game. I mean, you're talking 10 to 100 times the value, depending on the date and everything that goes into it. And so there's conditional rarity there. In modern collectibles, they flip it around. Obviously, there's no conditional rarity because the stuff was all made yesterday. I mean,
they should all be coming out.
They should
quality.
all be, yeah. You can send a batch of any new, as long as it'll fit in a slab, which a floating UFO won't. But
I don't know. NGC might come up
they'll
with one
figure
big
out
enough.
a way to do it if they can. Trust me, they'll call it a fancy mega magnetic slab or something. Who knows? But if you can get it in a slab and it's modern, and you send out a batch, you're always going to get 69s and 70s, and it should be predominantly 70s if it's a good mint that can strike well. So there's no conditional scarcity from that perspective, but there's mintage rarity, which you don't see on the old world stuff. Again, Morgans were made in the millions and millions and millions, and I'm just picking on Morgans because they're the most common collected coin. So there, it's they made a lot of them, but the condition can determine value because it's tough to find them in good condition. On the modern collectible side, the condition is always good, but it's tough to find them because there just weren't many made, right? Yep. So that's where the melding comes from. And if you put those two things together in your collection, you've hedged yourself on both sides. You've got conditional rarity items that, you've created the supply and demand discrepancy by having one that's tough to find in that condition. And on the other side, you've created it by having something they just didn't make a heck of a lot of, but is popular. And then you've got the bullion in the middle. Now that is, I always look at that as a completely different animal, because I think the reason that people buy physical metals, when we're talking about generic, is totally different than why people buy world coins, old U.S. coins, or modern collectibles. Sure. It's so much more logic-driven than emotionally driven. I think we, as collectors, most of it is emotional. It's, there's something that makes you feel connected to a piece. And this doesn't just have to be coins. It could be anything you collect. You might collect old comics, old video games, sports cards, who knows? There's something in your brain that makes you connect to the item. And then the rational part of your brain kicks in and says, well, if I'm going to spend $500 on a piece of cardboard that has, Mickey Mantle's face on it, is that also me not throwing my money away?
Right.
because we all have a rational side and an emotional side. So then you look and you go, oh yeah, the track record on this piece is good. 5 years ago, it was only worth $300. It's worth $500 now. I can see appreciation. And it allows your rational side, then allows your emotional side to make the purchase.
Yep.
And I think for coins on both ends, old or new, it's a very similar thing. Something connects you to it. You need to have a part of you that understands that you're not just throwing your money away. You're not buying a Beanie Baby for $300 that'll be worth 10 cents tomorrow, right? And there's enough track record and enough data points that you can easily access that show you, yeah, though this does make sense. And I think that's the disparity with the bullion collector. I shouldn't even call it collector. The stacker, the guy who is speculating on the metals markets, he's just doing the logical side. He's just doing the rational side. He's saying, this is a good time to buy this metal. I want to have it. Could be a variety of reasons, from prepping for the end of the world to, I'm a flipper and I'm going to buy it at 24 and sell it at 29. There's a whole different slew of reasons you might do it, but it's truly just about investment. You don't have to have a personal connection to the piece.
Right.
What's your personal connection to a Scottsdale 100-ounce bar? I mean, there's 8 million of them, and it doesn't matter.
Just
right?
metal.
It's just metal. But that person, over time, depending on the reason they're doing it, like I said, if you're prepping for something, it's a little different, right? You need that to be something that's usable and that is you could buy at the lowest premium.
Right.
But if you're doing it more on the investment side, that's where I pitch the diversity. I think it's just like anything else. I don't want all my money in stocks. I don't want all my money in real estate. I don't want all my money in metals. But I'd like to have some money in all of it, because if one goes down, I'm likely insulated. And if you microcosm that to the metals, just what we do, coins in general, there's those wedges of the numosphere. There's, I could buy old coins that I appreciate for whatever reason. I can buy new modern coins that I appreciate for whatever reason. I can buy physical metals that I'm speculating on. And now I've got a lot of diversity to where if one market isn't working, the other ones are probably insulating me against that downturn.
Right.
And I don't know that people look at it that way necessarily, but I think they should start to look at it that way. Because I'm not just here to pitch people on like the stuff we distribute for. I think you should have it all. I think you should have that whole range of products. Yeah. And you could include things.
And not just in our industry, but like you're saying.
Not just in our industry.
Get out there, get your stocks, get your real estate, art, diversify it.
And you look at, the other little niche parts of our industry, paper currency, exonumia, metals, tokens, things like that. Mm-hmm. All of those things have their place. And generally, if you're a collector, there's going to be some part of each of those that you connect with for whatever reason. And I mean, personally for me, I love metals. I really, really, really do. I grew up kind of collecting a lot of world stuff, and the art that was on the bronze medals, in the 17 and 1800s is phenomenal. I mean, we're talking, modern collectibles, you see high relief and people go crazy, right?
Oh,
they were all high relief. I mean, that was what the whole thing was. They just weren't coins. They weren't legal tender pieces of money. But the ability, I mean, even look at some of the U.S. stuff, the Columbian Expo stuff from 1893 that's big bronzes that are just beautiful, beautiful pieces. Art Deco stuff, you go way back, 1700s with France and Germany and the different metal makers. I happen to really love that stuff. If that's something that connects with you, it's no different than any other market. You can, look at the appreciation over time. You can find things that connect to you that if you buy them now, you should be, 10, 20, 30 years down the line, your estate, your children, whoever ends up with that product is going to be in a better place. But you still got to own something that connected to you in some way. And that's just that whole diversity. And the metal, paper money markets don't run congruent with old world U.S. markets.
Separate.
Totally separate. We've seen the paper market spike at times when U.S. coins were stagnating.
Yeah. So we're just coming off another one of those spikes. It's softening a little bit right now, but it was huge the last couple of years.
Yeah, so it's just having a piece of all those different things is in my mind, the best way to go about collecting, because collecting should be personal, but you should be able to find things in each of those arenas that connects to you.
Right. And still holds value.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely. So.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Numosphere podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next episode. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Numisphere. Until next time.